I booked an appointment at the best salon in Portland and asked them to give me a style that would make people remember me. I practiced my smile in the mirror until it looked natural, until I could deliver it without any trace of the pain that had been my constant companion for months. But the real preparation was professional. Because while Jessica had been busy planning her perfect engagement party, I had been busy building something that would last longer than any relationship built on stolen foundations. I had been working 16-hour days on the Morrison Industries account, the client that every marketing firm in the Pacific Northwest had been chasing for 2 years. I had been crafting presentations that would make Robert Chen see me not as David's ex-fiancé, but as the strategic mind who could expand Sterling and Associates into markets they had never imagined reaching. The call came on Friday afternoon, exactly 24 hours before Jessica's engagement party. Robert Chen's voice was warm with satisfaction as he offered me the position I had been dreaming about since I started at the company 4 years earlier. Regional Marketing Director for the Pacific Northwest, overseeing accounts from Seattle to San Francisco, with a salary that would finally allow me to stop worrying about whether I could afford the life I wanted to build. I accepted the position, on the spot, and then I did something that would have shocked the version of myself who had existed 6 months earlier. I asked Robert if he was planning to attend the engagement party the next evening. When he confirmed that he was, since David was one of his account managers, I mentioned that I would be there as well. I suggested that it might be an appropriate time to make the announcement about my promotion, since so many of our colleagues would be present. Robert was delighted by the idea. He loved grand gestures, loved making people feel special, loved being the bearer of good news. He immediately began planning how he would introduce me to the room, how he would frame my promotion as a testament to Sterling and Associates' commitment to recognizing talent. He was so enthusiastic about the idea that I almost felt guilty for the small thrill of anticipation that ran through me when I imagined the look on Jessica's face when she realized that her big moment was about to be overshadowed by my success. Almost. Saturday evening arrived with the kind of spring rain that makes Portland feel like a city inside a snow globe. I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, applying the final touches of lipstick that matched my dress, and tried to ignore the way my stomach was churning. The woman looking back at me was someone I barely recognized. Confident, polished, successful. The kind of woman who didn't need a man to validate her worth, who didn't need her family's approval to know she was valuable. The drive to the Riverside Event Center took 12 minutes, during which I practiced my breathing exercises and reminded myself of every reason I had to be proud of who I was becoming. I had survived the worst thing I thought could happen to me, and I had done more than survive. I had thrived. I had built something beautiful from the ashes of my old life, and nothing Jessica could do tonight would change that. The valet took my keys with a professional smile, and I walked through the glass doors into the reception area where a photographer was stationed to capture the arrival of each guest. I had forgotten about the photographer, forgotten that Jessica would want to document every moment of her triumph. But as the flash went off, I realized that this was exactly what I needed. Photographic evidence of the moment Sarah Mitchell walked back into the world that had tried to count her out. The main reception room was exactly as I had imagined it during all those months of wedding planning. Floor-to-ceiling windows showcased the city lights reflecting off the river, while fairy lights created a canopy of stars overhead. Round tables draped in white linen were arranged around a small dance floor, and a string quartet played softly in one corner. It was beautiful, elegant, perfect. Everything I had wanted for my own wedding reception. But instead of the knife twist of pain I had expected, I felt something else entirely. Relief. Because this wasn't my wedding reception. This was Jessica's engagement party, and I was here as a guest, not as the bride. I was here as the successful professional who had just landed the biggest promotion of her career, not as the woman whose fiancé had been stolen by her sister. I was here by choice, not by obligation. The first familiar faces I saw belonged To my parents, who were standing near the bar looking uncomfortable in their formal wear. My father, Tom, was tugging at his tie, while my mother, Linda, kept smoothing down her dress and glancing around the room with the slightly overwhelmed expression she wore whenever she found herself in spaces that cost more than she made in a month. They spotted me immediately, and I watched relief wash over their faces as they realized I had actually come. My mother reached me first, her arms wrapping around me in a hug that felt like an apology, and a plea for forgiveness rolled into one. She had been walking a tightrope for months, trying to maintain relationships with both her daughters while pretending that the situation was normal, that families survived these kinds of betrayals all the time. She pulled back to look at me, her eyes taking in my dress, my hair, the confidence I was wearing like armor. "You look absolutely stunning, Sarah," she said, and I could hear the relief in her voice. "I had been worried about how you were handling all of this, but you look like you're doing wonderfully." "I am doing wonderfully," I replied, and realized that it was true. "I'm actually doing better than I ever have before." My father nodded approvingly, his weathered hands squeezing my shoulders. "That's my girl," he said. "I always knew you were stronger than you thought you were." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The champagne flute felt cold against my palm as I watched my sister Jessica kiss my ex-fiancé David under the twinkling lights of the Riverside Event Center. 6 months ago, that should have been my engagement party. 6 months ago, I thought, I knew what betrayal looked like. I was wrong. Betrayal wasn't just losing the man I planned to marry to my own sister. Betrayal was standing in that room, watching them celebrate their love story while she caught my eye across the crowded dance floor and had the audacity to wink at me, like stealing my entire future was just another Tuesday for her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. But here's the thing about rock bottom. It gives you a solid foundation to build something unshakable. And while Jessica was busy playing house with my leftovers, I was busy becoming the woman I never knew I could be. The woman who would walk into that engagement party, not as the scorned sister, but as the newly appointed regional marketing director for Sterling and Associates. The woman who would smile politely when David's boss Robert Chen introduced me to the entire party as the powerhouse who just landed the biggest client in company history. The woman who would watch my sister's face drain of color as she realized that while she was stealing my past, I was building my future. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I'm about to tell you how the worst night of my life became the first night of my real life. The invitation arrived on a Tuesday morning in March, delivered to my downtown Portland loft like a beautifully wrapped grenade. Cream-colored cardstock with gold foil lettering that spelled out my nightmare in elegant script. Jessica Mitchell, and David Thompson request the pleasure of your company as they celebrate their engagement. My hands trembled as I read those words, not from sadness, but from the sheer audacity of it all. My little sister, the one I had protected and supported through every bad decision and failed venture, was marrying the man who had proposed to me just 8 months earlier. The ring David had given me, a vintage sapphire surrounded by diamonds, that had belonged to his grandmother, was now sitting on Jessica's finger. I knew because she had posted 17 Instagram stories about it in the past week, each one more theatrical than the last. The same ring that had caught the light during our quiet dinner at Le Bernardin, when David had gotten down on one knee and promised me forever. The same ring I had returned to him 3 months later when I walked into our shared apartment to find him and Jessica tangled together on the couch we had picked out together, too lost in each other to notice me standing in the doorway with grocery bags full of ingredients for the dinner I had planned to cook for him. I still remember the exact moment my world tilted off its axis. It wasn't the sight of them together that broke me initially. It was the sound of Jessica's laugh, that high, crystalline giggle she had perfected in middle school, echoing through the apartment that had been my sanctuary. She wasn't embarrassed or apologetic when she saw me. She was triumphant, like she had won some competition I didn't even know we were playing. David at least had the decency to look ashamed, scrambling to pull on his shirt while muttering something about how things had just happened, how they hadn't meant for it to go this far. But Jessica? Jessica stretched like a cat in the sunlight, pulling David's Columbia University sweatshirt over her head with deliberate slowness, making sure I noticed how it hung on her petite frame. The same sweatshirt I had worn during lazy Sunday mornings, the one that smelled like his cologne and made me feel wrapped in his love. That was 3 months ago. 3 months of Jessica posting couple photos with captions about unexpected love and soulmates and finding happiness in the most surprising places. 3 months of family dinners where my parents walked on eggshells, treating the situation like some unavoidable natural disaster rather than a choice my sister had made. 3 months of my mother's gentle suggestions that maybe it was time to move on, that holding grudges never helped anyone, that family was forever, but the engagement party invitation was different. This wasn't Jessica thoughtlessly falling into something that happened to hurt me. This was Jessica deliberately twisting the knife, because she knew that of all the venues in Portland, the Riverside Event Center was where David and I had planned to hold our wedding reception. I had shown her the photos, talked about the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Willamette River, the way the space transformed at sunset. I had brought her with me to the initial consultation, where she had gushed about how romantic it would be, how lucky I was to have found such a perfect place. Now she was using my dreams as the backdrop for her victory lap. The smart thing would have been to decline the invitation, to send a polite regret and spend that evening doing literally anything else. My best friend Maya had offered to take me to a spa retreat in Cannon Beach that weekend, somewhere I could drink wine and pretend the rest of the world didn't exist. But something in me had hardened in those 3 months since I found them together. Something that refused to hide, refused to be ashamed, refused to let Jessica write me out of my own story. I was going to that engagement party. I was going to walk into that room with my head held high, and I was going to show everyone exactly who Sarah Mitchell really was. The week before the party, I did something I had never done before. I invested in myself with the same intensity I had once invested in everyone else's happiness. I bought a dress that made me feel like I could conquer the world, a deep emerald silk that hugged my curves and made my eyes look like gemstones. The conversation was interrupted by a commotion near the entrance, where Jessica and David were making their grand entrance. Jessica looked exactly like the bride she was auditioning to become, in a flowing white dress that was borderline inappropriate for an engagement party, her dark hair swept up in an elaborate updo that had probably taken hours to perfect. David looked handsome in his navy suit, his smile broad and genuine as he shook hands with guests and accepted congratulations. But it was Jessica's smile that caught my attention. It was different from the calculated expressions she had been wearing in her social media posts. This smile was genuine, radiant, the kind that came from someone who believed she had everything she had ever wanted. For just a moment, looking at her happiness, I felt a flicker of something that might have been forgiveness. Then, she saw me across the room, and everything changed. Jessica's smile faltered for just a fraction of a second, so briefly that anyone who wasn't watching carefully would have missed it. But I was watching, and I saw the moment she realized that I had actually come to her engagement party. I saw the quick calculation in her eyes as she tried to figure out what my presence meant, whether I was here to cause a scene or to finally offer my blessing. She whispered something to David, who looked in my direction with an expression of surprise and something that might have been guilt. Then they began making their way through the crowd toward me, Jessica's smile now bright and performative, David trailing behind her like a reluctant shadow. "Sarah." Jessica's voice carried across the room as she approached, pitched at exactly the right volume to draw attention without seeming desperate for it. "I can't believe you came. You look absolutely incredible." She reached me with her arms outstretched, pulling me into a hug that felt like a chess move. I could smell her perfume, something expensive and floral that she had never worn before, probably chosen to match her new life as David's fiancé. Over her shoulder, I could see David watching us with careful eyes, trying to read the situation. "I wouldn't have missed it," I replied, my voice warm and steady. "Congratulations, Jessica. You look radiant." It wasn't a lie. She did look radiant, glowing with the kind of happiness that comes from getting everything you want exactly when you want it. But there was something else in her expression, something that looked almost like disappointment. As if she had been hoping I would show up devastated and broken, giving her the opportunity to play the gracious winner who magnanimously forgave her sister's bitterness. David stepped forward then, his hand finding the small of Jessica's back in a gesture that was both protective and possessive. "Sarah," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Thank you for coming. I know this isn't easy." "Actually, it's easier than I expected," I replied, meeting his eyes steadily. "I'm genuinely happy for both of you. You deserve each other." There was a moment of silence as they both tried to decode what I meant by that. David's expression remained carefully pleasant, but I could see the question in his eyes. Jessica's smile became a little more fixed, a little less natural. Before anyone could respond, a familiar voice cut through the tension. "Sarah Mitchell. There you are. I've been looking for you everywhere." Robert Chen materialized beside me, immaculate in his perfectly tailored black suit, his smile warm and paternal. He was exactly the kind of executive who commanded attention without demanding it, the type of leader who made everyone in the room feel like they wanted to impress him. "Mr. Chen," I said, extending my hand. "Thank you for coming tonight. Please, call me Robert. After the week you've had, I think we're well past formalities." He turned to Jessica and David, his expression politely interested. "You must be the happy couple. Congratulations." "Thank you," Jessica replied, but I could see the confusion in her eyes. She was trying to figure out who Robert was and why he was talking to me like we were old friends. "This is Robert Chen," I explained. "He's the regional vice president at Sterling & Associates. Robert, this is my sister Jessica and her fiancé David Thompson." David's eyes widened slightly. He knew exactly who Robert was, knew that he was 3 levels above him in the company hierarchy, knew that having Robert Chen know your name was the kind of career advantage that could change everything. "David Thompson," Robert repeated, his tone thoughtful. "You work in our accounts department, don't you? Good work on the Henderson portfolio last quarter." "Thank you, sir," David replied, clearly trying to process why his boss's boss was at his engagement party, talking to his ex-fiancé like she was someone important. Robert's smile widened. "Well, this is perfect timing. I was hoping to make an announcement tonight, and having so many of our Sterling colleagues here makes it even better." He gestured around the room, where I could see several familiar faces from the office, people who had worked with both David and me over the years. "Sarah," Robert continued, turning back to me with the kind of theatrical flair that made him such an effective executive, "I wanted to publicly acknowledge the incredible work you've done over the past few months. Landing the Morrison Industries account was a game changer for us, and your strategic vision for expanding our Northwestern presence has been exactly what we needed." I could feel the room's attention shifting toward us, conversations dying down, as people sensed that something important was happening. Jessica's grip on David's arm tightened almost imperceptibly, "Which is why," Robert continued, his voice carrying easily across the room, "I'm thrilled to announce that Sarah Mitchell has accepted the position of Regional Marketing Director for Sterling & Associates. She'll be overseeing all of our accounts, from Seattle to San Francisco, and I have no doubt that under her leadership, we're going to see unprecedented growth in the Pacific Northwest market." The room erupted in applause, and I felt my cheeks warm as colleagues and strangers alike turned to congratulate me. Someone handed me a glass of champagne, and I found myself surrounded by people who wanted to shake my hand, to tell me how much they had enjoyed working with me, to express their excitement about what I would accomplish in my new role. But through it all, I was watching Jessica's face. I watched her smile become more and more strained as she realized that her engagement party had just become my professional triumph. I watched her try to process the fact that while she had been planning this celebration of her romantic victory, I had been building something that would outlast any relationship. David looked stunned, as if he was seeing me clearly for the first time in months. This was the woman he had thrown away for stolen moments with my sister. This was the woman he had betrayed for someone who had never built anything lasting in her life. I could see him doing the math, calculating what he had given up, what he had chosen instead. When the initial wave of congratulations died down, Jessica stepped forward with a smile that looked like it was carved from ice. "Well," she said, her voice pitched to carry across the room, "isn't this just perfect?" My sister always did know how to make everything about herself. The room went quiet, the kind of silence that felt like holding your breath. I could see people looking back and forth between us, trying to understand the dynamic they were witnessing. Some of them knew our history, knew that David had been engaged to me before he had gotten together with Jessica. Others were just sensing the tension, the undercurrent of something unresolved. I looked at Jessica, really looked at her, and for the first time in months I felt genuinely sorry for her, because she was standing in a beautiful room at her own engagement party, surrounded by people who had come to celebrate her happiness, and all she could focus on was the fact that someone else was getting attention. She had stolen my fiancé, planned her party at the venue I had chosen, worn white to her own engagement celebration, and still felt threatened by my success. "You know what, Jessica?" I said quietly, my voice carrying in the silence. "You're absolutely right. I do know how to make things about myself. I've learned that if I don't advocate for my own success, no one else will. If I don't celebrate my own accomplishments, they'll get overlooked. And if I don't value my own worth, I'll end up settling for relationships where I'm not truly appreciated." I raised my champagne glass, and the gesture felt both celebratory and final. "So here's to making things about ourselves," I continued. "Here's to knowing our own value and refusing to accept anything less. Here's to building lives we're proud of, with people who truly deserve us." I took a sip of champagne and smiled at Jessica. A real smile this time, not the careful mask I had been wearing all evening. "Congratulations on your engagement, Jessica. I hope you both get exactly what you deserve." The room was still quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet now. People were processing what they had just witnessed, the graceful way I had turned Jessica's attack into a moment of self-affirmation. Robert Chen was beaming at me with obvious pride, and I could see several of my colleagues nodding in approval. David was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. There was regret there, and something that might have been longing, but also a kind of resigned acceptance. He knew that he had made his choice, and he was beginning to understand what that choice had cost him. But it was Jessica's face that I would remember long after this night was over. The angry flush in her cheeks, the way her carefully applied makeup couldn't hide the fury in her eyes, the realization that she had orchestrated this entire evening to humiliate me and had ended up showcasing exactly how far I had risen without her. The party continued around us, but something fundamental had shifted. People were congratulating me, asking about my new position, expressing genuine excitement about working with me in my expanded role. Jessica and David were accepting congratulations on their engagement, but the energy had changed. The spotlight had moved, and they were no longer the only stars of their own show. As the evening wore on, I found myself genuinely enjoying the celebration. Not because I was taking pleasure in Jessica's discomfort, but because I was surrounded by people who respected my work, who were excited about my future, who saw me as someone worth knowing. I was networking with potential clients, discussing strategy with colleagues, laying the groundwork for the success I was going to build in my new role. And when the time came to leave, I walked out of the Riverside Event Center with my head held high, my future bright with possibility, and my heart finally, truly free from the weight of what I had lost. Because I hadn't lost anything that night. I had found everything I had been looking for all along. I had found myself. Growing up as Jessica Mitchell's older sister was like being the stage crew for someone else's one-woman show. While she sparkled and demanded attention, I learned to work behind the scenes, making sure everything ran smoothly so she could shine brighter. It started early, probably around the time Jessica learned that tears could get her out of chores, and tantrums could redirect any conversation away from my accomplishments and toward her needs. I was 7 when I won the district spelling bee, but that was also the week Jessica decided she was afraid of the dark and needed someone to sleep in her room every night. Suddenly, my trophy was forgotten on a shelf while my parents focused on Jessica's midnight terrors. I was 12 when I made honor roll for the 4th consecutive semester, but Jessica had just started middle school and was struggling with mean girls who didn't appreciate her dramatic flair. My report card got a quick, "Good job, sweetheart," before the dinner conversation turned to strategies for helping Jessica navigate her social challenges. By high school, the pattern was so established that I didn't even question it anymore. Jessica was the one who needed rescuing, and I was the one who did the rescuing. When she got suspended for skipping classes to hang out at the mall, I tutored her every evening for 2 weeks to help her catch up on the work she had missed. When she crashed Dad's truck into a mailbox during an illegal joyride, I gave her my entire babysitting savings to help pay for the repairs so she wouldn't get grounded and miss the winter formal. I told myself I was being a good sister, that this was what families did for each other. But looking back now, I can see that what I was really doing was enabling a pattern that would define our relationship for the next 15 years. Jessica learned that there would always be someone to catch her when she fell, and I learned that my value came from being useful, from being the reliable one who could solve problems and smooth over conflicts. College should have been my escape, my chance to build an identity separate from being Jessica's older sister. I had earned a full academic scholarship to Portland State University, and for the first time in my life, I was somewhere that Jessica couldn't follow. I threw myself into my studies, majored in marketing with a minor in psychology, and discovered that I had a natural talent for understanding what motivated people, what made them want to buy products or believe in brands. But even across the country, Jessica found ways to make herself the center of my world. The phone calls started my sophomore year, usually around 2 in the morning, when she would be crying about some crisis that required immediate intervention. She had failed a class and needed help writing an appeal letter to stay in school. She had gotten involved with a guy who was bad news, and could I please call him and tell him to leave her alone? She had bounced 3 rent checks and was about to be evicted, and could I please figure out a way to help her without telling Mom and Dad? Each time I dropped whatever I was doing to solve Jessica's problems. I wrote her papers when she was too overwhelmed to handle the workload. I sent money when she spent her rent on a weekend trip to Las Vegas with friends. I called professors to negotiate deadline extensions when she missed assignments. I even flew home twice during finals week to help her deal with roommate drama that couldn't wait until winter break. My friends in college started joking that I had a part-time job as Jessica's personal assistant. They weren't wrong. I was managing her life from 3,000 miles away, sacrificing my own sleep and social life to keep her afloat. And the crazy part was, I thought this was normal. I thought this was what it meant to be a good sister, to be someone who could be counted on. After graduation, I moved back to Portland with a job offer from Sterling and Associates, excited to start building my career in the city I had always loved. Jessica was still living at home, working part-time at various restaurants while pursuing what she called her influencer career, which mostly consisted of posting outfit photos and lifestyle content to an Instagram account with 3,000 followers. I found an apartment in downtown Portland, a cozy one-bedroom with exposed brick walls and huge windows that overlooked the city. For the first time in my adult life, I had a space that was entirely mine, decorated with furniture I had saved up to buy, filled with books I actually had time to read, I was making good money, learning from talented colleagues, building a reputation as someone who could handle complex campaigns and difficult clients. That's when I met David Thompson. He was new to Sterling and Associates, hired as an account manager after 5 years at a smaller firm in San Francisco. He was charming and ambitious, with an easy smile and the kind of confidence that made clients trust him immediately. We started working together on the Henderson portfolio, a local chain of boutique hotels that needed a complete brand refresh. David handled the client relationships while I developed the marketing strategy, and we made a formidable team. Our first official date was after we had successfully pitched the Henderson campaign, when David suggested we celebrate with dinner at a little Italian place in the Pearl District. We talked for hours about everything except work, discovering that we both loved hiking and hated cilantro, that we both wanted to travel to New Zealand someday, and had embarrassing obsessions with true crime podcasts. He was funny and thoughtful, asking questions about my life that went deeper than surface pleasantries. When he walked me to my car that night, David paused before saying goodbye. "I really enjoyed tonight, Sarah," he said, his hand gentle on my arm. "I hope we can do this again soon, not as colleagues celebrating a win, but as two people who want to get to know each other better." I went home that night feeling lighter than I had in years, like I was finally becoming the person I had always wanted to be. Someone who was valued for more than just her usefulness, someone who deserved to be pursued and cherished and chosen. David and I fell into an easy rhythm over the following months. He would bring me coffee in the mornings when he picked up his own, always remembering that I liked oat milk and an extra shot of espresso. We would have lunch together when our schedules aligned, trying new restaurants around downtown and debating the merits of various marketing campaigns we admired. On weekends, we would explore the hiking trails around Mount Hood or browse the farmers market in the Pearl District, comfortable enough with each other to enjoy silence as much as conversation. The first time I brought David home to meet my family, Jessica was going through what Mom diplomatically called a rough patch. She had been fired from her restaurant job for showing up late too many times. Her influencer career wasn't generating any actual income, and she had just broken up with her boyfriend of 6 months after discovering he had been seeing someone else. She was living at home again, sleeping until noon and spending her afternoons lying on the couch in yoga pants, scrolling through social media and complaining about how unfair her life was. David was characteristically charming during that first family dinner, asking thoughtful questions about Dad's work as an electrician and complimenting Mom on her famous lasagna. He listened patiently when Jessica monopolized the conversation, with stories about her ex-boyfriend's betrayal, offering sympathetic murmurs at appropriate moments. But I could see him taking note of the family dynamics, the way conversations naturally centered around Jessica's problems, the way my parents seemed to expect me to have solutions for situations that weren't my responsibility. After dinner, as we were driving back to my apartment, David was quiet for several minutes before speaking. "Your family loves you a lot," he finally said. "But do they see how much you do for them?" "What do you mean?" I asked, though I knew exactly what he meant. "I watched you tonight, Sarah. You helped your mom serve dinner, you cleared the table without being asked. You deflected when Jessica got upset about her job situation, and you offered to help her, update her resume before we even finished dessert. You take care of everyone. That's just what families do," I replied. But even as I said it, I was thinking about how David's family dinners were different. His parents asked about his work, celebrated his successes, shared responsibility for maintaining family relationships. No one person was expected to be the eternal caretaker. David reached over and took my hand, his thumb tracing gentle circles across my knuckles. "I just want to make sure they take care of you too," he said quietly. It was the first time anyone had ever expressed concern about whether I was receiving as much as I was giving, and I felt tears prick my eyes in response. David saw me not just as someone who was capable and reliable, but as someone who deserved to be protected and cherished. He valued my strength while also recognizing that I might need support sometimes too. Our relationship deepened over the following year. built on a foundation of mutual respect and genuine friendship. David appreciated my work ethic and strategic mind, but he also loved the parts of me that had nothing to do with productivity or usefulness. He loved that I sang off-key in the shower, that I cried during commercials with puppies, that I could spend hours wandering through bookstores without buying anything. He made me feel like I was worth knowing for who I was, not just what I could do. When David proposed, it was during a weekend trip to Cannon Beach as we were walking along the shoreline at sunset. There were no elaborate gestures or public spectacles, just the two of us and the endless ocean and his grandmother's sapphire ring catching the last light of day. He told me that I was the person he wanted to build a life with, the person who made him want to be better, the person he couldn't imagine facing the future without. I said yes before he finished the question, tears streaming down my face as he slipped the ring onto my finger. For the first time in my life, I felt chosen, truly chosen, by someone who saw all of me and decided I was exactly what he wanted. We spent the next 8 months planning our wedding, choosing vendors and sending invitations and dreaming about the life we would build together. David wanted a big family someday, and I found myself imagining holidays where children would feel equally loved and supported, where no one child would be expected to sacrifice their own needs for their siblings' drama. We talked about traveling together, about the house we would buy in the suburbs with room for a home office and a garden, about growing old together on a porch swing somewhere peaceful. Jessica seemed genuinely happy for me during those months, helping me shop for a wedding dress and offering to plan my bachelorette party. She was between jobs again, spending most of her time working on her Instagram presence and dating a series of men who never seemed to stick around for more than a few weeks. But she appeared to be making an effort to be a supportive sister, showing interest in my wedding plans and offering to help with anything I needed. I should have known it was too good to be true. I should have recognized the signs, the way Jessica's mood would shift when David was around, the way she would find excuses to visit my apartment when she knew he would be there, the way she started asking detailed questions about our relationship and whether we ever fought or disagreed about anything important. But I was so happy, so focused on building my future with David, that I missed the warning signs completely. I trusted my sister because she was my sister, because family was supposed to be the one thing you could count on, because I couldn't imagine that someone I had protected and supported my entire life would deliberately destroy the best thing that had ever happened to me. The first crack in my perfect world came on a Tuesday evening in February, 3 months before our wedding. I had been working late on a campaign presentation and came home to find David sitting on my couch, staring at his phone with an expression I had never seen before. When I asked what was wrong, he looked up at me with eyes full of confusion and something that might have been guilt. "Sarah," he said slowly, "Jessica has been texting me." My stomach dropped, though I couldn't have said why. "What kind of texts?" I asked, sitting down beside him on the couch. David showed me his phone, scrolling through a conversation that had apparently been going on for several days. Jessica's messages started innocently enough, asking about work and making small talk about family dinner. But as the conversation progressed, her tone became increasingly flirtatious, increasingly personal. She was asking about his relationship with me, whether he ever felt like he was settling down too young, whether he ever wondered what it would be like to be with someone more adventurous, more spontaneous. I felt sick reading those messages, seeing my sister's words designed to plant seeds of doubt in David's mind about our relationship. But what made me feel worse was David's responses. He hadn't shut down the conversation immediately. He had engaged with her questions, admitted that sometimes he did worry about committing so young, acknowledged that he sometimes felt pressure to be the responsible, reliable partner that I deserved. "Why didn't you tell me about this sooner?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. David ran his hands through his hair, looking genuinely tormented. "I didn't know what to do, Sarah. She's your sister." I didn't want to cause problems between you two over what might just be innocent conversation. But tonight she asked if I wanted to meet up for coffee to talk about wedding planning. and I realized this might not be as innocent as I thought. I appreciated that David had ultimately told me about Jessica's texts, but I was hurt that he had allowed the conversation to continue for as long as he had. I was hurt that he had admitted doubts about our relationship to my sister instead of talking to me directly. But mostly, I was furious with Jessica for putting us both in this position. I confronted Jessica the next day, driving to my parents' house and finding her in her childhood bedroom, editing photos on her laptop. When I showed her the screenshots David had shared with me, she had the audacity to look confused and hurt. "I was just trying to get to know my future brother-in-law," she said, her eyes wide with manufactured innocence. "I thought it would be nice if we could be friends." I had no idea he would interpret it as anything inappropriate. "Jessica, you asked him if he was settling down too young. You asked him if he wanted to be with someone more adventurous. How exactly was he supposed to interpret that?" Jessica's mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something calculating in her expression before the innocent confusion returned. "Maybe you should be asking yourself why your fiancé is so easily swayed by a few friendly text messages," she said quietly. "Maybe the problem isn't that I was being too friendly. Maybe the problem is that he's not as committed to you as you think he is." The conversation ended with Jessica in tears, claiming that I was being paranoid and suspicious, that I was letting my own insecurities destroy my relationship with her. My parents sided with her, suggesting that I was overreacting to what was probably just a misunderstanding, that I was letting wedding stress affect my judgment. I left that house feeling crazy and alone, wondering if maybe I was being paranoid, if maybe Jessica really had just been trying to be friendly, and I had misinterpreted her intentions. David assured me that he loved me, that he was committed to our wedding, that he wouldn't let Jessica's inappropriate behavior affect our relationship. For a few weeks, things seemed to return to normal. Jessica stopped texting David, at least as far as I knew. We continued with our wedding planning, booking the photographer and finalizing the menu for our reception at the Riverside Event Center. David seemed more attentive than ever, bringing me flowers for no reason and telling me every day how much he loved me. But something had shifted. Some innocence had been lost. I found myself watching Jessica more carefully when she was around David, looking for signs of the calculating behavior I had glimpsed in her bedroom. I found myself questioning David's responses to her, wondering if he was being appropriately distant, or if he was still engaging with her in ways that encouraged her inappropriate interest. The doubt was poison, seeping into every interaction, making me second-guess things that should have been simple and natural. When Jessica complimented David's new haircut, was she just being polite, or was she flirting? When David laughed at one of her stories during family dinner, was he just being courteous, or was he enjoying her attention more than he should? I started working longer hours, throwing myself into my projects at Sterling & Associates as a way to avoid thinking about the growing tension in my personal life. The Morrison Industries account landed on my desk during this period, a massive opportunity that would require months of intensive work, but could potentially transform my career if I could land the contract. I poured everything I had into that campaign, staying late at the office night after night, researching Morrison's history and competitors, developing strategies that would set Sterling & Associates apart from every other firm competing for their business. The work was challenging and fulfilling, giving me a sense of purpose and accomplishment that helped balance the anxiety I was feeling about my personal relationships. David was supportive of my professional ambitions, understanding when I had to cancel dinner plans because of client meetings, bringing me takeout at the office when I was working too late to cook. But I could see the strain it was putting on our relationship, the way my preoccupation with work was creating distance between us just when we should have been growing closer before our wedding. Looking back, I think that's when Jessica struck. While I was distracted by the biggest professional opportunity of my life, while David was feeling neglected and uncertain about our relationship, while my family was already convinced that I was too suspicious and paranoid about Jessica's motives, she had the perfect storm of circumstances to work with, and she used them with surgical precision. The night I found them together, I had been planning to surprise David with dinner from his favorite Thai restaurant. I had finally wrapped up the Morrison presentation earlier than expected and wanted to celebrate by spending an evening focused entirely on us. No work talk, no wedding planning stress, just the two people who loved each other reconnecting after a difficult few weeks. I used my key to let myself into David's apartment, calling out his name as I set the takeout bags on the kitchen counter. When he didn't respond, I assumed he was in the shower or had fallen asleep on the couch. I was arranging the food on plates when I heard Jessica's laugh echoing from the living room, that same crystalline giggle that had always been her signature. The rational part of my brain tried to come up with innocent explanations as I walked toward the sound. Maybe they were planning a surprise for me. Maybe Jessica had stopped by to discuss wedding plans, and David had invited her to stay for dinner. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation for why my sister was in my fiancé's apartment when he wasn't expecting me. But the moment I saw them together on the couch, I knew there was no innocent explanation. They were tangled together like lovers, Jessica wearing nothing but David's Columbia sweatshirt, David's hands in her hair as they kissed with the desperate intensity of people who had been denying their attraction for too long. The grocery bags fell from my hands, the sound of breaking glass finally alerting them to my presence. David's face went white with shock and guilt, while Jessica looked almost relieved, like she was finally free to stop pretending. "Sarah," David started, scrambling to pull on his clothes. "This isn't what it looks like." But Jessica stretched like a satisfied cat, making no effort to cover herself or apologize for what I had just witnessed. "Actually," she said with that same calculating smile I had seen in her bedroom weeks earlier, "this is exactly what it looks like. David and I are in love, Sarah. We have been for months. We tried to fight it because we didn't want to hurt you, but some things are just meant to be." I stood there in the doorway, surrounded by broken glass and the ruins of my carefully planned surprise, watching my sister claim ownership of the man I had planned to marry in 3 months. And the most devastating part wasn't even the betrayal itself. It was the look of relief on David's face, like he was finally free to stop pretending to be someone he wasn't. That's when I knew this hadn't been a moment of weakness or a terrible mistake. This had been a choice, a deliberate decision to destroy my life because Jessica wanted something that belonged to me. And for the first time in my life, I realized that my sister didn't love me at all. She saw me as competition, as an obstacle to getting what she wanted, as someone whose happiness was less important than her own desires. I walked out of that apartment without saying another word, leaving behind the ring David had given me, the future we had planned together, and any illusion I might have had that family meant anything more than shared DNA. I drove home in a state of shock, my hands shaking as I tried to process what I had just witnessed. My mind struggling to accept that the two people I trusted most in the world had been systematically destroying my life behind my back. The worst part was yet to come. Because over the following days and weeks, as the reality of what had happened began to sink in, I would discover that Jessica and David's relationship wasn't new. It had been building for months, through secret text messages and private meetings, through shared complaints about my work schedule and my commitment to my career, through a carefully constructed narrative that painted me as the demanding, high-maintenance fiancé who didn't appreciate what she had. I would learn that Jessica had been poisoning David against me for weeks, planting seeds of doubt about our compatibility, suggesting that he was too young to settle down with someone so focused on professional success, encouraging him to believe that he deserved someone more fun, more spontaneous, more appreciative of his attention. And David, instead of talking to me about his concerns or working through his doubts like a mature partner would, had allowed himself to be seduced by the fantasy of a relationship with no responsibilities, no expectations, no pressure to be anything other than charming and desired. They had built their connection on the foundation of my trust, using my love for both of them as a weapon against me. convincing each other that they were the victims in a situation where I was somehow keeping them from their true happiness. It was the cruelest kind of betrayal, because it wasn't just about losing David or losing my sister. It was about discovering that the entire framework of my life, the belief that love and loyalty and family meant something, had been built on illusions that could be shattered by someone who cared more about getting what she wanted than about preserving what we had built together. But in destroying my old life, Jessica had unknowingly given me the greatest gift she could have offered. She had forced me to stop believing that my worth came from being useful to other people. She had forced me to stop accepting crumbs of affection from people who saw me as a convenience rather than a treasure. She had forced me to build something entirely my own, something that no one could take away from me because it belonged to me alone. And that gift would prove to be more valuable than any relationship I had lost. The silence that followed my discovery felt like drowning in reverse. Instead of water filling my lungs, it was the absence of everything I thought I knew about my life rushing out, leaving me gasping in a reality I didn't recognize. I sat in my apartment that night, still in the clothes I had worn to work, staring at the takeout containers I had never opened, trying to understand how the person I had been 12 hours earlier could have been so completely wrong about everything. The ring was still in David's apartment. I had pulled it off my finger and placed it on his coffee table without a word, the small click of metal against wood somehow louder than any conversation we might have had. There was nothing to say, really. No explanation that could undo what I had seen, no apology that could repair what had been broken, no promise that could rebuild trust that had been systematically dismantled over months of lies. I called in sick to work the next morning. Something I had never done unless I was genuinely ill. But I was ill. In a way that had nothing to do with fever or congestion, and everything to do with the complete reorganization of my understanding, of myself and my place in the world. I spent the day in my pajamas, going through the motions of normal life while my brain struggled to process the magnitude of what had happened. The first call came from my mother around lunchtime. David had called her, she said, her voice careful and worried. He had told her that there had been some kind of misunderstanding, that Jessica had been upset about something and had come to him for comfort, that I had walked in at the worst possible moment and jumped to conclusions. "Mom," I said, cutting her off before she could continue with David's version of events. "There was no misunderstanding. I found them together in a way that left no room for interpretation." "But honey," she continued, her voice taking on, the pleading tone she used when she was trying to smooth over one of Jessica's messes. "People make mistakes. Maybe if you could just talk to them, try to understand what really happened." I hung up on my mother for the first time in my life. Not out of anger, but out of a sudden, crystalline understanding that she was going to choose Jessica's version of this story, just like she had chosen Jessica's version of every story for the past 28 years of my life. She was going to find a way to make this my fault, to suggest that if I had been a better fiancé, a more attentive sister, a less demanding person, none of this would have happened. The texts started that afternoon. Jessica's messages were masterpieces of manipulation, perfectly crafted to sound apologetic while shifting blame and responsibility away from herself. She was so sorry that I had to find out this way. She had never meant for me to get hurt. She and David had tried so hard to fight their feelings, but sometimes love just happened in ways you couldn't control. She hoped that someday I would understand, that they hadn't chosen this, that it had chosen them. David's messages were simpler, more direct. He was sorry. He had made a terrible mistake. He loved me and wanted to fix this, to make it right somehow. Could we please talk? Could we meet for coffee and discuss what had happened like adults? I deleted every message without responding. Not because I was trying to punish them, but because I was beginning to understand that engaging with their narratives would only pull me deeper into their version of reality, where I was the unreasonable one, the victim who was making things harder than they needed to be by refusing to accept their explanations and apologies. Instead, I did something I had never done before. I focused entirely on myself. I took the rest of the week off work, using vacation days I had been saving for my honeymoon. But instead of wallowing in self-pity or plotting revenge, I started making lists. Lists of things I wanted to accomplish professionally. Lists of places I wanted to travel. Lists of hobbies I had always meant to try but had never had time for because I was too busy managing other people's lives. For the first time in my adult life, I had no one else's crisis to solve, no one else's problems to fix, no one else's happiness to prioritize over my own. The freedom was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. I started with my living space, going through every room of my apartment and removing anything that reminded me of David or the life we had planned together. The coffee table books about destination weddings went into a donation box. The engagement photos came down from the walls. The bottle of champagne we had been saving for our wedding night went down the kitchen sink, not out of dramatic gesture, but because I couldn't imagine any future occasion special enough to warrant saving it. But I didn't stop with David's belongings. I also removed traces of Jessica. Things I had never noticed were taking up space until I started really looking. The stack of magazines she had left during her last visit. The hair products she kept in my guest bathroom for when she stayed over. The spare key she had never returned after helping me move in. I gathered it all up and packed it away, reclaiming my space as entirely my own. The physical act of clearing out felt like psychological preparation for something bigger. I was making room, literally and figuratively, for whoever I was going to become next. The hardest part was canceling the wedding, not because I had any desire to marry David anymore, but because undoing something that had taken months to plan required confronting the reality of what I had lost over and over again. Every vendor I called, every deposit I forfeited, every explanation I had to give was another small death of the future I had been building. But even that process taught me something valuable. I learned that I was stronger than I had realized, more capable of handling difficult conversations and complex logistics than I had given myself credit for. I learned that I could be decisive and efficient even when I was heartbroken, that I could take care of business even when my personal life was in ruins. The caterer was understanding, offering to apply my deposit toward a future event or donate the planned meal to a local shelter. The photographer was sympathetic but firm about the cancellation fee. The florist was genuinely sad to lose such a large order, but respected my decision to call everything off. Each conversation was a small step toward accepting the reality of my new circumstances. The venue coordinator at the Riverside Event Center was the most difficult call to make. I had loved that space, had imagined myself dancing there with David under the twinkling lights, had pictured our families coming together to celebrate our future. When I explained that I needed to cancel our wedding reception, the coordinator was kind but professional, walking me through the cancellation policy and refund timeline. I should have known then that Jessica would choose that same venue for her engagement party. It was exactly the kind of calculated cruelty she specialized in, taking something that had been important to me and transforming it into a symbol of her victory. But in that moment, I was just grateful to close that chapter of my life and move forward. With the wedding canceled and my apartment reclaimed, I turned my attention to my professional life with a focus I had never experienced before. The Morrison Industries account became my white whale, the project that would prove to myself and everyone else that I was more than just someone's abandoned fiancé. I threw myself into research and strategy development with an intensity that surprised even me. I spent hours studying Morrison's corporate history, analyzing their previous marketing campaigns, identifying gaps in their current brand positioning that Sterling and Associates could fill. I reached out to contacts in adjacent industries, gathering intelligence about Morrison's competitors and market challenges. I developed presentation materials that were more comprehensive and innovative than anything I had created before. The work was consuming in the best possible way. When I was focused on Morrison's marketing challenges, I wasn't thinking about David and Jessica. When I was crafting campaign strategies, I wasn't replaying the moment I had found them together. When I was preparing for client meetings, I wasn't wondering what I could have done differently to prevent the betrayal. My colleagues at Sterling & Associates began to notice the change in my work quality and intensity. Robert Chen stopped by my office more frequently, asking thoughtful questions about my progress and offering resources to support my efforts. Other senior staff members started including me in strategic discussions that had previously been above my pay grade. I was earning respect based purely on the merit of my work, not because I was someone's girlfriend or sister or helper. The transformation wasn't just professional. I started taking better care of myself physically, joining a gym near my apartment and discovering that I actually enjoyed the meditative quality of running on a treadmill while listening to podcasts. I experimented with cooking more elaborate meals, not because I was entertaining anyone, but because I deserved to eat well. I bought clothes that made me feel confident and powerful, not because I was trying to impress anyone, but because I wanted to look in the mirror and see someone I respected. Most importantly, I started saying no to things I didn't want to do. When my mother called to invite me to Jessica's birthday dinner, I declined politely but firmly. When old college friends reached out to offer condolences about my broken engagement and invited me to girls' nights that were clearly pity parties, I thanked them, but explained that I was focusing on other priorities. When coworkers suggested I might want to take time off to process my emotions, I told them that work was exactly where I wanted to be. I was learning to trust my own instincts about what I needed, rather than accepting other people's assumptions about what I should want or feel. It was a radical departure from the people-pleasing patterns that had defined my entire adult life. The silence from David and Jessica was initially a relief, but as weeks passed, it began to feel ominous. I knew them both well enough to understand that they weren't the type of people who could sustain guilt or regret for extended periods. They would find ways to justify their actions, to create narratives that made them the heroes of their own story. And those narratives would inevitably cast me as the villain who was standing in the way of their true love. I was right. The first sign of their revised history came through mutual friends who started reaching out with carefully worded messages about how sorry they were that things hadn't worked out with David, how they hoped I could find happiness for Jessica and David, how they were sure that everything would work out for the best in the end. The subtext was clear. The official story was that David and I simply hadn't been right for each other, and his relationship with Jessica was a happy accident that proved everyone had ended up where they belonged. The second sign was Jessica's social media presence, which transformed from sporadically posting lifestyle content to carefully curated relationship documentation. Pictures of her and David at restaurants I had introduced him to, photos of them hiking trails we had explored together, stories about their adventures and inside jokes and shared interests, all presented as evidence of a love story that was meant to be. But the most telling sign was the way they began appearing together at family events and social gatherings, not as guilty conspirators, but as a happy couple who had found each other against all odds. They were rewriting history in real time, transforming their betrayal into a romantic narrative about soulmates who couldn't deny their destiny. I heard about these appearances through my cousin Maya, who remained the only family member willing to acknowledge that what had happened to me was genuinely awful. Maya would call me after family dinners or birthday parties, providing carefully neutral updates about how David and Jessica were being received by our extended family. Most people seemed willing to accept the new narrative, she reported, especially since I wasn't there to contradict it with my presence. The engagement announcement came exactly 3 months after I had found them together, posted simultaneously on both their Instagram accounts with professional photos taken at the Japanese garden downtown. Jessica was wearing David's grandmother's ring, the same ring I had worn for 8 months, the same ring I had carefully placed on his coffee table the night my world ended. The caption talked about unexpected love and following your heart and being grateful for life's beautiful surprises. I stared at those photos for a long time, not because they hurt, but because they felt like artifacts from someone else's life. The David in those pictures looked like a stranger, and the Jessica looked like an actress playing a role she had auditioned for her entire life. They looked happy, but it was the kind of happiness that required constant documentation to prove it existed. That's when I knew they were both making a mistake, that their relationship was built on the thrill of forbidden attraction rather than any genuine compatibility or shared vision for the future. But I also knew that it wasn't my responsibility to save them from their own poor decisions anymore. Instead, I focused on the Morrison Industries presentation, which was scheduled for the week after Jessica and David's engagement party. I had been working on it for months, refining every detail, anticipating every possible question or objection. It was the most important professional moment of my career so far, and I was determined to make it count. The night before the engagement party, I made a decision that surprised even me. I was going to attend, not because I wanted to torture myself or create drama, but because I was genuinely curious about who I had become in the months since my world had fallen apart. I wanted to test my own strength, to see if I could walk into that room as the confident, successful woman I had been building rather than the broken victim they expected me to be. I had a feeling that Robert Chen would be there, since David worked for Sterling & Associates, and the guest list would likely include colleagues and professional contacts. If I was going to make an impression, if I was going to demonstrate that I had not only survived but thrived, this would be the perfect opportunity. The morning of the engagement party, I woke up early and went for a long run along the Willamette River, thinking about how much my life had changed since the last time I had been in the same room as David and Jessica. I was no longer the woman who had bent herself into impossible shapes trying to accommodate everyone else's needs and expectations. I was no longer the woman who believed that her value came from being useful to other people. I was no longer the woman who accepted crumbs of affection and called it love. I was someone entirely new, someone I was still getting to know, someone who was strong enough to walk into that engagement party with her head held high and her future bright with possibility. The irony wasn't lost on me that Jessica's engagement party would be taking place at the venue where I had planned to hold my wedding reception. But instead of feeling like a victim returning to the scene of her humiliation, I felt like a phoenix, returning to the place where she had been reborn from ashes. I spent the afternoon getting ready with the same attention to detail I would apply to any important professional event. This wasn't about looking beautiful for anyone else's benefit. This was about presenting myself as the person I had become, the person who commanded respect and attention not because of who she was dating or how useful she could be, but because of what she had accomplished on her own. When I walked into that engagement party, I wasn't Sarah Mitchell, the abandoned fiancé. I wasn't Sarah Mitchell, the helpful sister who had been betrayed by her family. I was Sarah Mitchell, the marketing professional who was about to land the biggest account of her career, who was building something meaningful and lasting with her own hands, who had learned that the best revenge was living well enough that you forgot you had ever wanted revenge in the first place. And as I stood in that beautiful room, surrounded by the golden light and fairy tale atmosphere that Jessica had chosen for her celebration, I realized that I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt anymore. I wasn't even particularly interested in Jessica and David's relationship anymore. I was simply, completely, authentically myself for the first time in my life. That was the moment I knew I had already won everything that mattered. The days following the engagement party felt like living in a completely different universe. I woke up Monday morning in my downtown loft, sunlight streaming through the windows, and for the first time in months, I didn't immediately think about David and Jessica when I opened my eyes. Instead, my first thought was about the Morrison Industries presentation scheduled for Wednesday, about the strategic points I wanted to emphasize, about the future I was building brick by brick with my own hands. My phone had been buzzing all weekend with messages I chose not to read. I could see the preview lines on my lock screen, enough to know that Jessica was spiraling, that my parents were confused and concerned, that David was trying to process what had happened when his boss introduced me as the new regional marketing director at what was supposed to be his moment of celebration. But I wasn't ready to engage with their chaos yet. I had learned something valuable in the months since I had found them together. Something about the power of silence, about how much more effective it was to let people's actions speak for themselves, rather than getting drawn into explanations and justifications and emotional reactions that only muddied the waters. Instead, I made coffee in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had once cried over takeout containers and tried to understand how my life had imploded so completely. Now it felt like a sanctuary, a space that belonged entirely to me, where I could think clearly and make decisions based on what I wanted, rather than what other people expected from me. The Morrison Industries presentation consumed my focus for the next 2 days. I refined every slide, practiced every transition, anticipated every possible question Robert Chen and the Morrison executives might ask. This wasn't just about landing a client anymore. This was about proving to myself that I could build something magnificent from the ruins of my old life, that I could transform heartbreak into fuel for success. Maya called Tuesday evening while I was reviewing my notes one final time. She was the only family member I was speaking to regularly, the only one who had consistently acknowledged that what Jessica and David had done was genuinely terrible, rather than some unfortunate misunderstanding that I was being dramatic about. "Sarah," she said without preamble, "you need to know what's happening with your family right now. Jessica is telling everyone that you deliberately sabotaged her engagement party, that you coordinated with David's boss to steal attention from her special night." I laughed, a sound that surprised me with its genuine amusement rather than bitterness. "Maya," I said, "I got a promotion based on months of hard work. Robert Chen had been planning to announce it for weeks. The timing was just coincidence." "I know that," Maya replied. "And anyone with half a brain knows that. But Jessica is spinning it like you've been plotting some elaborate revenge scheme. She's telling people that you're vindictive and jealous and can't handle seeing her happy." "What about my parents?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. Maya was quiet for a moment. "They're buying it, Sarah. They want to believe that this is all some misunderstanding that can be resolved if everyone just talks it out. They think you're being stubborn by not engaging with Jessica's attempts to explain herself." I wasn't surprised, but I was disappointed. My parents had spent so many years accommodating Jessica's version of reality that they had lost the ability to recognize truth when it was standing right in front of them. They had chosen comfort over justice, family peace over holding people accountable for their actions. "Thanks for telling me," I said to Maya. "But I'm not going to defend myself against accusations that anyone with functioning eyes can see are ridiculous. I got a promotion because I earned it. If Jessica wants to make that about her, that says everything about her character and nothing about mine." After hanging up with Maya, I sat in my living room with a cup of tea and thought about how different my response would have been 6 months earlier. The old Sarah would have immediately called her parents to explain herself, would have crafted long text messages defending her actions, would have bent over backward trying to prove her innocence and good intentions. But the new Sarah understood that people who wanted to believe the worst about you would find ways to do so, regardless of how much evidence you provided to the contrary. People who wanted to paint you as the villain in their story would interpret your kindness as manipulation, your success as spite, your healing as revenge. Wednesday morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn air that made Portland feel like the most beautiful city in the world. I dressed carefully for the Morrison presentation, choosing a navy suit that made me feel powerful and confident, adding jewelry that caught the light without being distracting. I looked in the mirror and saw someone I respected, someone who had earned her place at the table through hard work and strategic thinking. The presentation went better than I had dared to hope. The Morrison executives asked thoughtful questions, nodded appreciatively at my market analysis, and seemed genuinely excited about the campaign strategies I had developed. Robert Chen looked proud and vindicated, like someone who had made an excellent bet that was paying off exactly as he had predicted. When we concluded the meeting with handshakes and promises to be in touch soon, I knew I had succeeded. Not just in landing the account, though that was significant, but in proving to myself that I could perform at the highest level even when my personal life was complicated, that my professional worth wasn't dependent on my relationship status or family dynamics. Robert walked me back to my office afterward, his expression thoughtful. "Sarah," he said, stopping outside my door, "I want you to know that what happened Saturday night at the engagement party, that announcement, it had nothing to do with the timing of your promotion. I had been planning to offer you this position for weeks, based purely on your work performance." "I appreciate you clarifying that," I replied, though I wasn't surprised. The timing was just coincidence. Robert nodded, then hesitated before continuing. "I also want you to know that if you're experiencing any awkwardness with David because of your previous relationship, we can address that professionally. Your personal history shouldn't impact your ability to succeed in this role." It was a thoughtful offer, and I appreciated Robert's awareness of the potential complications. But I also realized that I wasn't worried about working with David anymore. Whatever hold he had once had over my emotions had been completely severed the night I watched him build his happiness on the foundation of my pain. "I don't anticipate any problems," I told Robert honestly. "David and I are both professionals, and I'm sure we can maintain appropriate workplace boundaries." What I didn't tell Robert was that I was already formulating plans for my new role that would minimize my direct interaction with David anyway. As regional marketing director, I would be focusing on bigger picture strategy and client relationships, working with senior executives and external partners rather than individual account managers. David would become peripheral to my professional life, just as he had become peripheral to my personal one. The success of the Morrison presentation created a ripple effect throughout Sterling & Associates. Colleagues who had previously seen me as competent but unremarkable began approaching me with strategic questions and collaboration ideas. Senior staff members started including me in decision-making conversations about company direction and client development. I was finally being recognized for my actual capabilities rather than being pigeonholed as someone's girlfriend or the helpful woman who organized office birthday parties. But the most significant change was internal. I discovered that professional success, when it was earned through genuine effort and talent, created a kind of confidence that was unshakable. Unlike the validation I had once sought through relationships and family approval, this confidence belonged entirely to me. No one could take it away because no one had given it to me in the first place. Thursday afternoon brought the official confirmation that Morrison Industries had chosen Sterling & Associates for their rebranding campaign. The contract was worth more than any account the company had landed in its 15-year history, and my role in securing it earned me recognition throughout the Portland business community. Robert announced the win in a company-wide email that specifically credited my strategic vision and presentation skills. I was reading congratulatory messages from colleagues when my phone rang. David's name appeared on the screen, the first time he had tried to call me since the night I had found him with Jessica. I stared at the display for several rings before declining the call. Whatever he wanted to say, I wasn't interested in hearing it. He called again an hour later, then again that evening. When I continued to ignore his attempts to reach me, he sent a text message that was visible on my lock screen. "Sarah, please, let me talk to you. I need to explain what's been happening. Things aren't what they seem." I deleted the message without reading it fully. David had lost the right to explanations and conversations the moment he chose to betray my trust. More importantly, I had lost interest in whatever justifications he wanted to offer for his choices. His relationship with Jessica was no longer my problem to solve or understand. The weekend brought more attempts at communication from various family members, each one convinced that they could mediate some kind of reconciliation if I would just be reasonable and listen to Jessica's side of the story. My mother called twice. My father sent a carefully worded email about the importance of family forgiveness. And even my Aunt Carol reached out to suggest that perhaps it was time to move, past old hurts and focus on healing. But the most revealing message came from Jessica herself, a long text that arrived Sunday evening while I was meal prepping for the upcoming week. The message was a masterpiece of manipulation, carefully crafted to sound apologetic while actually demanding that I take responsibility for the discomfort she was experiencing as a result of her own actions. She wrote about how hard it had been to watch me struggle after David and she fell in love, how guilty she felt that their happiness had caused me pain, how she hoped that someday I could understand that love sometimes happened in unexpected ways. She mentioned that people were starting to ask questions about why I wasn't participating in family events, how my absence was creating tension and awkwardness for everyone else. But the most telling part of her message was the ending, where she wrote that she hoped my recent professional success would help me find the confidence to move forward and stop holding grudges that were hurting the whole family. As if my promotion was some kind of consolation prize that should make me grateful enough to forget about her betrayal. I read the message twice, marveling at Jessica's ability to center herself even in an apology, to make my reaction to her betrayal the real problem that needed to be solved. Then I deleted it and blocked her number, not out of anger, but out of clarity. I finally understood that Jessica would never take genuine responsibility for her actions, would never offer the kind of authentic apology that might make reconciliation possible. More importantly, I realized that I didn't want reconciliation anymore. I didn't want to go back to being the family member who absorbed everyone else's dysfunction in the name of keeping peace. I didn't want to pretend that betrayal was acceptable as long as everyone involved felt bad about it afterward. I didn't want to minimize my own worth to make other people comfortable with their choices. Monday morning marked the beginning of my new role as regional marketing director, and I threw myself into the transition with enthusiasm that surprised even me. I spent the week meeting with key clients, reviewing existing campaigns, and developing strategies for expanding Sterling and Associates' reach throughout the Pacific Northwest. The work was challenging and stimulating, requiring me to think strategically about market trends and competitive positioning, while also managing multiple client relationships and internal team dynamics. For the first time in my career, I was being paid to think big picture, to envision possibilities rather than just execute someone else's vision. But perhaps the most satisfying aspect of my new role was the respect it commanded from colleagues and clients. When I walked into meetings, people listened to my ideas because they knew I had earned my position through merit. When I offered strategic recommendations, they were taken seriously because they came from someone with a proven track record of success. David and I crossed paths occasionally in the office, brief encounters in hallways or conference rooms that were professional but distant. He seemed smaller somehow, less significant than he had once appeared in my life. Not because he had changed, but because my perspective had shifted so dramatically that he no longer had the power to affect my emotional equilibrium. During one of these encounters, while we were both waiting for the elevator after a client meeting, David attempted to initiate a personal conversation. "Sarah," he said quietly, "I've been trying to reach you. I think we should talk about what happened, clear the air professionally if nothing else." I looked at him calmly, this man who had once been the center of my romantic universe, and felt nothing but mild curiosity about what he thought clearing the air might accomplish. "David," I replied, "there's nothing to discuss. We're colleagues now, nothing more. I think we can maintain professional courtesy without revisiting the past." The elevator arrived before he could respond, and I stepped inside with a polite nod. That effectively ended the conversation. As the doors closed, I caught a glimpse of his expression, confused and slightly hurt, as if he couldn't understand why I wasn't interested in his explanations or apologies. That evening, I met Maya for dinner at a new restaurant in the Pearl District, our first social outing since the engagement party. She looked proud and slightly amazed as she listened to me describe my new responsibilities and the projects I was developing for the Morrison account. "You sound completely different, Sarah," she said over dessert. "Not just happy, but powerful. Like you finally figured out who you're supposed to be." Maya was right. I had figured out who I was supposed to be, but more importantly, I had figured out who I didn't want to be anymore. I didn't want to be the woman who defined herself through her relationships with other people. I didn't want to be the woman who accepted betrayal in the name of family harmony. I didn't want to be the woman who made herself smaller to make other people comfortable. The following weeks brought news through Maya that Jessica and David's relationship was experiencing some turbulence. Apparently, the reality of building a relationship on the foundation of shared betrayal was more complicated than they had anticipated. Without the excitement of forbidden romance, they were discovering that they had very little in common beyond their mutual willingness to hurt me. David was struggling with guilt about how their relationship had started, according to Maya's reports from family gatherings I no longer attended. Jessica was frustrated that David wasn't as attentive and romantic as he had been during their secret affair phase. They were having arguments about money, about Jessica's lack of career direction, about David's workaholic tendencies that Jessica had once found attractive but now found neglectful. But most tellingly, they were apparently arguing about me. Jessica wanted David to cut off all professional contact with me, to request a transfer to a different department, or even leave Sterling and Associates entirely. David was refusing, partly because he couldn't afford to jeopardize his career, but also because he seemed to be realizing that his feelings for me might not have been as easily transferable as he had believed. I listened to these updates with the detached interest of someone watching a soap opera. Their problems were no longer my problems to solve. Their relationship drama was no longer my responsibility to navigate. Their happiness or lack thereof was no longer connected to my own sense of worth and well-being. Instead, I was building something entirely my own. I was developing new client relationships that had nothing to do with my personal history. I was creating marketing strategies that showcased my strategic thinking and creative vision. I was earning respect and recognition based purely on my professional capabilities. The most unexpected development was the attention I was receiving from other companies in Portland's business community. Word about my success with the Morrison account had spread, and I was being contacted by executive recruiters who wanted to discuss opportunities at larger firms, companies that could offer even more responsibility and compensation than my current role. I wasn't actively looking to leave Sterling and Associates, but the conversations were flattering and informative. They confirmed what I had begun to suspect, that my skills and experience were more valuable than I had previously realized, that I had been underestimating my own market worth for years. But more than the external validation, I was discovering internal satisfactions I had never experienced before. The joy of solving complex strategic problems, the thrill of presenting ideas that excited clients and colleagues, the pride of building something lasting and meaningful with my own efforts and talents. For the first time in my adult life, I was living entirely for myself. Not in a selfish way, but in a self-respecting way. I was making decisions based on what would advance my goals and fulfill my ambitions rather than what would make other people happy or comfortable. I was investing my time and energy in relationships and activities that added value to my life rather than draining it. The holiday season approached with none of the anxiety and obligation I had previously associated with family gatherings. When my mother called to discuss Thanksgiving plans, I politely declined to attend, explaining that I had made other arrangements. When she pressed for details about these other arrangements, I simply said that I was looking forward to a peaceful holiday focused on gratitude and reflection. The truth was that I had accepted an invitation from Maya and her boyfriend to join their Friendsgiving celebration, a gathering of chosen family that promised good food and genuine warmth without the undercurrent of drama and manipulation that had characterized my family holidays for years. But I had also begun to understand that I didn't need to justify my choices to people who had demonstrated that they didn't have my best interests at heart. I didn't owe explanations to family members who had chosen Jessica's comfort over my well-being. I didn't need to make my decisions palatable to people who had proven they would prioritize family peace over family justice. I was learning to trust my own judgment about what I needed and what I deserved. And what I deserved was a life built on authenticity and respect, relationships based on mutual care rather than one-sided obligation, success earned through my own efforts rather than given as compensation for accepting betrayal. As autumn turned to winter, I realized that the woman who had walked into that engagement party had been someone in transition, someone who was testing her own strength and discovering her own worth. The woman I was becoming was someone who no longer needed to test anything, who knew her own value and refused to accept anything less than she deserved. I was finally home in my own life, and I had built that home with my own hands. Winter in Portland arrived with the kind of gentle persistence that transforms the city into something softer, more introspective. The rain that had once felt oppressive now felt cleansing, washing away the last traces of the person I used to be and revealing someone I was genuinely excited to become. My corner office on the 15th floor offered a perfect view of the city lights reflecting off the Willamette River, a daily reminder of how far I had traveled from the woman who had once measured her worth by how useful she could be to other people. The Morrison Industries campaign was exceeding every expectation we had set during the initial presentation. Their quarterly sales had increased by 38% in the first 3 months of our partnership, and their brand recognition had expanded into markets they had never successfully penetrated before. Robert Chen had forwarded me emails from Morrison's CEO expressing amazement at the strategic vision we had brought to their company, specifically praising my ability to identify opportunities that their previous marketing firms had completely overlooked. But the professional success, satisfying as it was, had become almost secondary to the personal transformation I was experiencing. For the first time in my adult life, I was living according to my own values and priorities rather than constantly adapting myself to meet other people's expectations. I was making decisions based on what would advance my goals and fulfill my ambitions, not what would keep peace in relationships that had been draining my energy for years. The silence from my family had evolved from painful to peaceful over the months since Jessica's engagement party. My mother had stopped calling with updates about family events I wasn't attending. My father had stopped sending emails about the importance of forgiveness and moving forward. Even Jessica had apparently accepted that I wasn't going to respond to her attempts at manipulation disguised as reconciliation. Maya remained my only connection to the family dynamics I had left behind, and even those updates were becoming less frequent and less emotionally charged. It was as if everyone had finally accepted that I had made a permanent choice to prioritize my own well-being over their comfort, and they were learning to function without me as their designated problem solver and peacekeeper. The most unexpected development was how little I missed any of it. I had anticipated that stepping away from my family would feel like losing something essential, like cutting off a limb that I would always feel phantom pain from. Instead, it felt like finally removing a heavy backpack I had been carrying for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to stand up straight. My social life had reorganized itself around people who actually enjoyed my company rather than people who needed my services. Maya and I had developed a tradition of monthly brunches where we discussed everything from career ambitions to travel dreams to books we were reading. I had connected with colleagues who shared my interests in hiking and photography, leading to weekend adventures that filled my Instagram feed with images of natural beauty rather than carefully curated family moments. Most surprisingly, I had begun dating again, though not in the desperate way of someone trying to replace what she had lost. Instead, I was approaching relationships from a position of strength and selectivity, interested in finding someone who could add value to an already fulfilling life, rather than someone who could rescue me from loneliness or validate my worth. Alex Parker had been introduced to me through Maya's boyfriend, an architect who specialized in sustainable residential design and had the kind of quiet confidence that came from being genuinely good at something he cared deeply about. Our first coffee date had extended into a 4-hour conversation about everything from urban planning to favorite travel destinations to the books that had shaped our worldviews. What impressed me most about Alex wasn't his professional success or his undeniable attractiveness, though both were appealing. It was his obvious respect for my autonomy and independence. He asked thoughtful questions about my work and listened carefully to my answers. He expressed genuine admiration for the career I had built and the choices I had made to prioritize my own growth. He never once suggested that I was too focused on my professional life or that I should be looking for someone to take care of me. Our relationship developed slowly and naturally, built on mutual respect and genuine compatibility rather than urgency or neediness. Alex had his own full life, his own friend groups and hobbies and professional commitments, which meant that our time together felt chosen rather than desperate. We enhanced each other's lives without trying to complete or fix each other. Spring arrived with the kind of dramatic beauty that made Portland famous, cherry blossoms exploding along the park blocks and tulips emerging in perfectly planned displays throughout the city. I found myself taking longer lunch breaks to walk through downtown, appreciating the way the light fell across the buildings and reflecting on how dramatically my relationship with the city had changed over the past year. This was no longer the place where I had planned a wedding that never happened, or the backdrop for family gatherings that left me feeling drained and undervalued. This was the city where I had built a career I was proud of, where I had discovered my own strength and worth, where I had learned to trust my own judgment about what I deserved from life and relationships. The news about Jessica and David's breakup came through Maya during one of our brunches in early April. Apparently, the relationship that had seemed so destined and passionate during their secret affair phase had deteriorated rapidly once they were forced to build an actual partnership based on day-to-day reality rather than forbidden excitement. The immediate cause had been financial, according to Maya's sources within the family gossip network. Jessica had been pushing David to propose officially and start planning a wedding, but David had been reluctant to take on the expense of a formal ceremony when Jessica wasn't contributing financially to their shared life. She was still working sporadically in restaurants while focusing on her social media presence, which generated virtually no income despite her conviction that influencer success was just around the corner. But the deeper issue, Maya reported, with obvious satisfaction, was that they had discovered they actually didn't like each other very much when they weren't united by the thrill of betraying someone else. Jessica found David boring and overly focused on work. David found Jessica demanding and self-centered. Neither of them had been willing to do the unglamorous work of building a real partnership based on compromise and mutual support. I listened to this update with genuine curiosity, but no emotional investment in the outcome. Their relationship had been built on the foundation of my pain, and its collapse felt like simple justice rather than something I needed to celebrate or mourn. They had gotten exactly what they deserved, which was each other for as long as they could stand it. What struck me most about their breakup was how completely irrelevant it felt to my current life. The woman who had been devastated by their betrayal 18 months earlier might have felt vindicated or relieved or even tempted to reach out with false sympathy. But the woman I had become barely registered their drama as something that concerned her. David had apparently taken the breakup harder than Jessica, possibly because he was beginning to understand what he had actually lost when he chose momentary excitement over genuine partnership. Maya reported that he had been asking mutual acquaintances about my life, wanting to know if I was dating anyone, whether I seemed happy, if I ever mentioned missing him. The answer to all those questions was information he would never receive from me. I had built a life that was completely independent of his choices and feelings, a life that would continue to flourish regardless of whether he regretted his decisions or longed for what he had thrown away. Summer brought the official announcement that Sterling & Associates had been selected as the marketing firm for 3 additional Fortune 500 companies, all of whom had specifically requested to work with me based on recommendations from Morrison Industries. Robert Chen called it the most successful business development period in the company's history, and my role in attracting these high-profile clients had earned me another promotion, this time to Senior Vice President of Strategic Development. The new position came with a salary that allowed me to start looking at houses rather than apartments, to consider international travel that went beyond weekend getaways, to invest in experiences and possessions that reflected my actual preferences, rather than what I could afford while supporting other people's financial emergencies. But more than the material benefits, the promotion represented a level of professional recognition that validated every choice I had made over the past year and a half. I was being rewarded for prioritizing my own growth and refusing to accept relationships that diminished my potential. I was being celebrated for the strength I had shown in walking away from situations that weren't serving me, even when those situations looked like what I was supposed to want. The house I eventually chose was a renovated Craftsman in the Irvington neighborhood, with original hardwood floors and built-in bookshelves and a kitchen that received morning light through windows that faced east toward Mount Hood. It had a small garden where I could plant vegetables and flowers, a home office where I could work when I chose to, and guest rooms for friends who wanted to visit without any expectation that I would manage their comfort or entertainment. Moving into my own house felt like the final step in a transformation that had begun the night I found David and Jessica together. I was no longer the woman who lived in spaces that accommodated other people's needs, who chose furniture that would work for entertaining people who took her hospitality for granted, who organized her life around other people's schedules and preferences. Alex helped me move, along with Maya and several colleagues who had become genuine friends over the months of working together on challenging projects. The process was efficient and lighthearted, filled with laughter and pizza and the kind of easy camaraderie that comes from people who genuinely enjoy each other's company. As we arranged furniture and hung artwork and stocked the kitchen with items I had chosen purely because I liked them, I realized that this was what contentment felt like. Not the desperate happiness that comes from finally getting what you think you want, but the deep satisfaction that comes from building something that reflects your authentic self. Fall arrived with the kind of crisp beauty that made me grateful to be living in the Pacific Northwest, and with it came an unexpected communication from my mother. Not a phone call or text message, but an actual handwritten letter delivered to my office, as if she understood that my personal boundaries needed to be respected even in her attempt to reach out. The letter was different from her previous attempts at communication, lacking the manipulation and guilt that had characterized her earlier efforts to bring me back into the family fold. Instead, it was a simple acknowledgement that she had failed me as a mother, that she had chosen Jessica's comfort over my well-being, that she understood why I had chosen to distance myself from family relationships that had become toxic. She wrote about watching Jessica struggle with the consequences of her choices, about David's obvious regret and depression following their breakup, about the way family gatherings had lost their joy and energy without my presence. But most importantly, she wrote about her own growing understanding that she had enabled patterns of behavior that had ultimately hurt everyone involved, including Jessica herself. The letter didn't ask for forgiveness or reconciliation. It didn't suggest that enough time had passed for everyone to move forward. It simply acknowledged the truth of what had happened and expressed regret for the role she had played in allowing it to continue for so long. I read the letter twice, sitting in my office with tears in my eyes, not because I was ready to rebuild those relationships, but because it felt healing to finally receive the acknowledgement I had needed for so long. My mother might never be able to undo the damage that had been done, but she had given me something valuable by finally seeing the situation clearly and taking responsibility for her part in it. I didn't respond to the letter immediately. needing time to process my feelings and decide what kind of relationship, if any, I wanted to have with family members who had proven they couldn't be trusted to prioritize my well-being. But I kept the letter in my desk drawer, a reminder that people could change and grow, even if that change came too late to repair what had been broken. Winter returned to Portland with familiar gentleness, and with it came a sense of completion that I hadn't expected to feel so soon. I had built a life that was entirely my own, filled with work that challenged and fulfilled me, relationships that added value rather than drama, experiences that reflected my genuine interests and values. Alex and I had been together for almost a year, and our relationship continued to deepen in ways that felt natural and sustainable. He had never once suggested that I was too independent or too focused on my career. He celebrated my successes without feeling threatened by them, supported my ambitions without trying to redirect them, and loved me in ways that enhanced rather than constrained who I was becoming. When he finally told me he loved me, it was during a quiet evening in my house as we were cooking dinner together and discussing plans for a trip to New Zealand we were considering for the following summer. The words came naturally, without drama or ultimatums or pressure for immediate reciprocation. "I love you too," I replied, and meant it in ways I had never meant it before. Not as someone desperate for validation or terrified of being alone, but as someone who had learned to love herself first and therefore had authentic love to offer someone else. On New Year's Eve, as I stood on my back deck watching fireworks explode over the city I had learned to call home in the truest sense, I thought about the woman I had been 2 years earlier. She had been kind but naive, generous but exploited, loving but unwise about where to invest that love. I didn't regret being that woman because she had been necessary for becoming this woman. Her mistakes had taught me about boundaries. Her pain had taught me about strength. Her betrayal had taught me about the difference between being needed and being valued, between family obligation and chosen relationship, between settling for what was offered and holding out for what was deserved. Jessica had thought she was taking something from me when she stole David, but what she had actually done was force me to discover resources I didn't know I possessed, to build a life I couldn't have imagined wanting, to become someone I never could have been while I was still trying to earn love from people who were incapable of giving it freely. I thought about David, probably spending this New Year's Eve alone or with colleagues who didn't know about the choices that had led him to this isolation, possibly regretting the moment he chose temporary excitement over lasting partnership. I felt sorry for him, but distantly, the way you might feel sorry for a character in a book who made poor decisions and suffered predictable consequences. I thought about my family, gathered somewhere without me, probably still convinced that time would heal wounds that had never been properly acknowledged or addressed. I wished them well, but from a distance that felt both necessary and permanent. Mostly, though, I thought about the future I was building with my own hands, brick by brick, choice by choice, day by day. A future that belonged entirely to me, that reflected my values and priorities, that would stand strong regardless of what storms other people's choices might bring. The fireworks faded. The city settled into the quiet of a new year beginning. And I went inside to the home I had created, to the life I had built, to the woman I had become through the simple act of refusing to accept anything less than I deserved. I had learned the most important lesson anyone can learn about love and family and self-worth. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give yourself is the courage to walk away from people who don't know how to value what you offer. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable behavior that hurts everyone involved. Sometimes the strongest choice you can make is to build something new rather than trying to repair something that was broken beyond fixing. I had given myself those gifts, and they had transformed me into someone I was proud to be, someone I enjoyed spending time with, someone who would never again mistake being needed for being loved or accept betrayal in the name of keeping peace. As I turned off the lights and headed upstairs to bed, I smiled at the knowledge that tomorrow would bring another day of the life I had chosen. Another opportunity to build something beautiful from the foundation of my own strength and wisdom. Jessica had been right about one thing. I wasn't needed anymore. And that was the most liberating truth I had ever learned. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these. Just click and check them out.